I used to believe the forest was honest. Even when it was quiet, even when the snow erased every track and the wind made voices out of the trees, I believed that the woods told the truth, if you knew how to listen. That was before I started hearing the radio calls, before the static began to whisper back. I've worked for the National Park Service for nearly 15 years. I won't name the park, not because I'm protecting secrets, but because I still have to drive those roads. The place deserves its peace, even if what happens there won't let me sleep anymore. It's somewhere in the northern Rockies, dense, rugged, old enough that it remembers more than we do. My station sits on a ridge between two valleys that never see the same weather. One side is always in fog and the other burns bright with sun, even in winter. When I started, I loved that contrast. It felt like balance, the light and dark halves of the forest keeping each other honest. But lately, I've begun to think the fog isn't weather at all. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it hides what the land doesn't want to forget. Most days were simple. Patrol the trails, check the fire rings, keep the tourists from wandering into the deep backcountry. Nights were harder. Radios never sleep. They crackle, whisper, and remind you that someone, somewhere, might be calling for help. That sound is the lifeline of a ranger. It's how we keep each other sane out here, until it isn't. It started on a Tuesday in late October, right before snow season. I was stationed alone at the Upper Lookout, a 40-minute drive from the main station. The shift was routine. I signed in at 1900 hours, logged the weather, light wind, dropping temps, clear skies, and brewed some coffee that tasted like rainwater and rust. I remember that detail because the silence felt too heavy, and I welcomed the familiar ritual. Around 10 p.m., the radio hissed alive. "Base, this is Ranger 12. Come in." The call was crisp, calm, official. I almost answered before realizing there was no Ranger 12. We hadn't used that call sign in years, not since 2013, when a rookie named Allen went missing during a backcountry sweep. His body was never found. I froze, my hand hovering over the mic, listening to the faint hum under the voice. "Copy. Base? Visibility's low up on Timberline. Requesting confirmation." The words were exactly how we'd been trained to report conditions. Tone steady, like he was reading from a script. But the storm report that night was wrong. It wasn't foggy. I checked the window, heart pounding. The sky outside was moonlit, sharp enough to carve shadows. I thumbed the mic. "Say again, Ranger 12. No answer, only static. Then, quietly, almost like someone exhaling into the receiver, came a whisper, a single word. "Found." The line went dead. I stayed awake the rest of the night, replaying it in my head, trying to convince myself it was interference from a nearby repeater tower or an old channel bleeding through. That happens sometimes in the mountains, especially when the air is cold and dry. But when I checked the comm logs the next morning, the system showed no transmission at that time. Nothing. Still, I logged it in my report. My supervisor, a man named Larson, who's worked these woods longer than I've been alive, just nodded. "Mountain echoes," he said. "Radio waves bounce off the ridges. Sometimes they pull ghosts out of the air." He smiled when he said it, but his eyes didn't. Over the next few weeks, the calls kept coming. Always the same voice, always identifying as Ranger 12. The reports varied. Following tracks north, campfire still burning, they had to advise on next checkpoint. And then every time the same word at the end, "Found." I stopped logging them. Larson didn't want to hear about it anymore, and the other rangers just shrugged it off. Out here, stories grow like moss. You learn not to water them. But something changed after the fourth call. That night, I dreamed I was walking through a narrow canyon, my radio clipped to my chest. Every few steps, the static would flare and whisper my name. I woke up to the real radio buzzing. This time, the voice didn't identify itself. It was breathless, urgent. "He's still out here." I sat up, drenched in sweat. "Who is this?" "Don't." The voice cut off. Static filled the rest. I couldn't breathe. I thought about driving down to the station, but some stubborn part of me wanted to prove I wasn't afraid. I told myself it was a prank. Maybe someone hacked the frequency. At sunrise, I stepped outside. Frost coated the lookout deck. My truck was half buried in it, like it had been sitting there for years. The air felt heavier than it should. And then I saw the tracks. They were boot prints, Ranger issue, standard Vibram sole pattern, but they led from the forest toward the lookout, stopping right at my door. I hadn't seen another soul in days. I followed them back down the trail, heart hammering, expecting to see them fade at some point. They didn't. They went straight into the trees and stopped at a small clearing. There, half buried in pine needles, was an old radio handset, rusted, cracked, the number 12 carved into its side with a knife. When I picked it up, it hissed faintly, even though the battery compartment was empty. Then, just for a second, it spoke. "Base, I found him." The words were quieter than breath. I dropped the thing and stumbled back, pulse roaring in my ears. The forest felt alive around me, every branch too still, every sound too measured. It wasn't wind. It was waiting. I don't remember walking back to the lookout. My report that night was incoherent. I wrote something about electromagnetic interference, about maybe losing sleep. But the truth is, I knew what I heard, the cadence, the tone. It wasn't random static. It was Alan. Larson called me into his office the next day. His voice was calm, too calm. "You've been logging some strange entries," he said, sliding my notes across the desk. "You're not the first to hear it." That last sentence hit me harder than anything else. He told me that after Alan vanished, the old base radios picked up similar transmissions for nearly a month, always on the same frequency, always ending with found. Then they stopped, until now. Larson leaned back, eyes distant. "Sometimes the mountains echo things we haven't earned the right to hear." He advised me to take a few days off, but rest didn't help. The quiet only made it worse. Every time I closed my eyes, I'd hear the click of a mic being keyed somewhere deep in the woods. 3 nights later, I broke protocol. I took the truck out past Timberline, the same area where Alan disappeared. The snow was heavy by then, blanketing everything in silence. I parked near the base of an old fire road and turned off the engine. The radio came alive before I touched it. "Base, this is Ranger 12. Visibility's low, requesting confirmation." I stared at it, throat dry. "Alan?" Static. Then, "You shouldn't have come alone." The air around me dropped 10 degrees. I could see my breath fogging up the windshield. Somewhere beyond the headlights, a shadow moved between the trees. Tall, wrong in its proportions, like it was bending with the fog instead of walking through it. Then the voice again, calm, precise. "Base, target located, requesting extraction." But the voice didn't come from the radio this time. It came from behind me. I spun around so fast the seatbelt locked across my chest, breath catching in my throat. The cab was empty, but the air had weight, thick and humming like a transformer before it blows. Every sound was swallowed by that vibration. I could feel it crawling into my teeth. I reached for my flashlight. When I flicked it on, the beam caught a shimmer of movement outside. Something pale between the trees, slipping behind the trunks like it didn't want to be seen all at once. I killed the truck lights to get a clearer look. The forest went dark except for the faint orange pulse of the radio. It clicked again. "Copy base, I see him." The voice wasn't mine, wasn't anyone's I knew, but it used my words, my tone, the way I'd filed hundreds of night reports before. "Who is this?" I whispered into the mic. Static crackled. Then a voice that sounded just enough like mine to paralyze me said, "Me." The transmission bled into a screech, like metal being dragged across glass. I dropped the mic and stumbled out into the cold. The snow was waist deep, and every sound I made died instantly. Even my heartbeat felt muffled. The world was a tunnel of white and black, with that low hum still pressing from the ground up. Then I heard the footsteps. Slow, careful, crunching in perfect rhythm with mine, like an echo delayed just enough to know it wasn't me. I turned the flashlight toward the sound, and for a split second, I saw what looked like another ranger uniform about 20 feet away. The same jacket, the same radio clipped to the chest strap, even the same hat tilted against the snow. "Ranger 12?" I called out. The figure froze. The radio on its chest flickered red. Then it raised its hand in a slow, deliberate motion and keyed the mic. "Base, it said in that steady voice. I found him. That was the moment my legs gave out. I hit the snow hard, the light jerking wildly across the tree trunks until it caught the reflection of eyes. 2 points, low to the ground, glinting like wet stones. They blinked once and disappeared. When I looked up again, the figure was gone. Only one set of tracks led back toward the lookout. Mine. I don't remember driving down the mountain. I must have been half conscious, shaking so badly that the steering wheel rattled against my palms. When I reached the main station, the clock read 3:42 a.m. The ranger on duty, a new kid fresh out of academy, looked at me like I'd been pulled from a flood. My uniform was soaked, boots half frozen. He asked if I'd found anything. I told him no. But I lied, because that wasn't the end. The next day, I tried to forget. I filed the bare minimum paperwork, logged equipment malfunction, and pretended to sleep in the bunk room. But sometime around dusk, when the wind hit the eaves just right, the radio on the desk clicked on again. No call sign, no request, just that breath between frequencies. Do you hear it too? I unplugged the thing, pulled the battery, even checked the fuses. Still, the sound leaked through the speakers. Faint, rhythmic, almost like breathing. That's when I noticed the smell. It wasn't the must of old electronics or damp gear. It was metallic, like blood drying on cold iron. The same scent I'd caught on my gloves after pulling the radio from the snow. I tried to trace it, thinking maybe an animal had died in the crawl space under the station, but it was strongest at the window. I pulled back the curtain. Outside, in the snowfield behind the barracks, stood 3 shapes. Not people. Shapes. Outlines where snow should have fallen but hadn't, like invisible bodies holding the storm at bay. I froze. My breath fogged the glass, and as it cleared, I saw faint flickers of red light within those outlines, like radio LEDs pulsing through the fog. They didn't move, but I swear I could hear the faint click of microphones being keyed in unison. That night, I barricaded the door. The next morning, everything looked normal again. The snow was untouched, the smell gone, and the radio silent. For a week, I convinced myself I'd had some kind of breakdown, a stress hallucination. But the forest doesn't forgive denial, not out here. Because when I got assigned to the night patrol again, the transmissions came back. Only this time, they weren't calling from the void, they were responding. I'd key my mic to report in, base, Route 17 clear, heading east, and 2 seconds later, another voice would answer on a parallel channel. The same cadence, the same words. Base, Route 17 clear, heading east. Perfectly mirrored. Sometimes it lagged by half a second. Sometimes it was simultaneous, like I was speaking in stereo. And once, just once, it said something before I did. That was the night I realized whatever was out there wasn't replaying us. It was learning. Larson tried to ground me after that. He said I needed rest, maybe a few sessions with the department therapist, but he wouldn't look me in the eye when he said it. He'd heard it too, I could tell. His fingers kept twitching toward his own radio like he expected it to jump alive any second. That winter, we lost another ranger, a woman named Claire. She'd been out checking backcountry trail markers when her signal cut out. The last thing she transmitted before disappearing was a single phrase, "Ranger 12, do you copy?" The base responded, but the only thing that came back was that whisper again. Found. Search teams combed 30 miles of terrain. No trace. No prints. Just her radio, sitting upright in the snow, microphone depressed like someone had been holding it for hours. After that, the Park Service switched our frequency. They said it was to avoid interference from civilian CB users, but we all knew better. Still, the new channel didn't help. A week later, I got a call from another district station across the range, 300 miles away. They'd picked up something strange on their scanner, a voice saying my name. When I played back the audio they sent me, I could hear it clear as a bell, not static, not distortion. My name, spoken in my own voice, followed by the sound of wind through pine. I don't remember what I said after that. I think I laughed, maybe cried. The idea that the woods had recorded me, replicated me, it broke something open in my head. And that's when I started thinking about the caves. There's an old system west of the park, unmapped, deep, mostly sealed off since the 70s after a collapse took 2 surveyors. Locals still talk about hearing tapping from the rock, especially during winter thaws when the meltwater seeps into the cracks. I'd never gone near them before, but that name, Ranger 12, kept circling in my brain, like a signal bouncing off the walls of something hollow. So I made a plan. I'd hike out there at first light, bring a portable radio, and trace the signal to its source. If it was interference, I'd prove it. If it wasn't, well, maybe I'd finally see what had been calling all this time. The morning I left, the fog was so dense it swallowed sound. Even the crunch of my boots disappeared before it reached my ears. I followed the ridge trail until the sun rose, then descended toward the caves. Every 50 yards, the radio on my belt chirped, static bursts that sounded like syllables, like something trying to form words. By the time I reached the cave mouth, the display was glowing red. The cave was smaller than I expected, just a slit in the limestone, half choked with ice. A draft breathed out of it, smelling of iron and something older, something like damp copper mixed with ash. My flashlight beam caught the shimmer of water running down the walls, pooling into a narrow stream that disappeared into blackness. I keyed the mic on my portable. Base, Ranger on site, entering the cave. The reply came before I could even take a step. Copy, entering cave? The radio repeated. My own voice, word for word, half a second delayed. I froze. My throat tightened, fingers stiff against the transmitter. Who is this? A pause. Then in that same dead calm tone I'd heard from the ghost call weeks before. Ranger 12. Found him. I backed up a step, heart pounding against my ribs so hard it hurt. The air felt thicker the deeper I breathed, heavy like fog after a storm. The static grew louder, pulsing like a heartbeat. Something flickered deep inside the cave, a brief red glow, as if a radio light had blinked from under the rock. I should have left right then. I should have turned back and reported a structural collapse, or at least radio interference. But something about hearing my own voice from that darkness, it hooked into me. Curiosity mixed with fear. I crouched and ducked inside. The sound changed instantly. No echo, no wind, just a low, distant hum vibrating through the stone. I took 3 careful steps forward, light bouncing across walls, scratched with deep gouges. They weren't natural. Parallel marks like someone had dragged metal across the rock, scraping words I couldn't fully read. ESE. Still. Below. The flashlight flickered. For a moment, the beam cut out, and in that darkness, I heard the unmistakable click of a mic being keyed right beside my ear. Then, softly, base, requesting extraction. The radio on my chest wasn't even on. The words came again, louder this time. Base, requesting extraction. The sound was bouncing around me now, from behind, from the tunnel, from inside the rock itself. The channel was alive with overlapping voices, all mine, all slightly out of sync. My flashlight came back to life, and in that circle of light I saw something glinting at my feet. A ranger badge. Rusted. Half buried in silt. The number was barely legible, but I made out the last 2 digits. 12. That was when I noticed the boot prints leading away from it, fresh, deep, and heading deeper into the tunnel. My instinct told me to run. But the rational part, the part that always trusted evidence, procedure, chain of command, told me to follow. That logic has saved my life before. But down there, reason is what kills you. I followed the prints until the ceiling opened into a chamber tall enough to stand. The walls pulsed with condensation, and the air shimmered with faint electrical current, tiny sparks of static jumping between mineral veins like a dying storm. My radio erupted in sound. Dozens of voices, layered like a chorus, all speaking the same words in different cadences. Base, this is Ranger 12, found him. Base, this is Ranger 12, found him. Base, this is Ranger 12, found him. They overlapped until they blurred into noise. I covered my ears, but I could still feel the words pressing against my skull. Then a new voice cut through the chaos, quieter, lower. He's been here the whole time. I turned the light toward the far wall and froze. The stone wasn't stone. It was a wall of collapsed gear. Radios, badges, helmets, canteens, all fused together with silt and bone. Dozens of radios, each blinking red in slow, uneven rhythm. And in the center of it all, something was sitting upright. A ranger uniform, half-rotted, slumped against the rock with a microphone clutched in skeletal fingers. Its chest plate read, Ranger 12. The radio in its hand clicked once. Base, it whispered in a rasp that was too dry to be breath. Copy? I stumbled backward, beam shaking. The body shifted slightly, as if air were moving through it. For a moment, I thought I saw its jaw open. Then I realized the sound wasn't coming from it at all. It was coming from my radio. Base, visibility's low, requesting confirmation. I dropped the mic. It swung from its strap, hitting the rock. But the voice kept talking. Following tracks north, campfire still burning, found him. Then something else joined in. A distorted version of my own voice whispering right behind me. You should have stayed at the lookout. I turned. The beam caught the faint outline of another figure in the tunnel. Too tall, too thin, its silhouette flickering like heat distortion. I couldn't make out a face, only the shape of a ranger hat and a dull glow where its chest radio should have been. I bolted. My shoulder slammed against the cave wall, pain shooting down my arm as I scrambled toward the entrance. The air grew colder with every step until I saw daylight, a gray slit through the fog. But when I reached it, I froze again. The cave mouth was gone. There was just rock, solid, cold, unbroken stone where the exit should have been. I pounded against it until my hands bled. No sound echoed. The hum had returned, deeper now, vibrating in my bones. The flashlight dimmed, the radio screamed with static, and then silence. For a long time, I sat there in the dark, feeling the weight of the mountain press around me. My own breathing sounded too loud, too deliberate. When I finally dared to turn on the radio again, I didn't key the mic. I just listened. The first voice that came through was Larson's. Base to Ranger, come in. Do you copy? Then another voice joined in, overlapping him perfectly, my own voice. Base to Ranger, come in. Do you copy? I shut the radio off, but the echo didn't stop. Somewhere in the blackness ahead, something started to hum along with it, deep, rhythmic, and almost pleased. That's when I realized what the cave really was. It wasn't a place, it was a receiver. And I was the transmission. When I woke up, I was back at the lookout. My uniform was damp, boots caked with silt. The radio sat on the desk, blinking steadily. The display read Channel 12. Larson was gone. The main base hadn't called in 3 days. And when I tried to reach anyone on the new frequency, all I heard was static, until faintly my own voice came through. Base, I found him. It wasn't recorded, it wasn't delayed. It was happening right then. And from outside, echoing through the fog, I heard 100 radios keying their mics at once. The sound came in waves, clicks and bursts of static rolling through the trees like a slow storm. Each one layered over the next until it became impossible to tell which direction they were coming from. The forest didn't echo naturally that way. It sounded like the air itself was broadcasting. I stepped out onto the deck, boots crunching against the frost. The fog below the ridge wasn't still anymore. It pulsed faintly, rising and sinking like the breath of something vast beneath it. The tree line flickered with red, as if tiny radio LEDs were blinking deep between the trunks. For a second, I thought maybe there were rescue teams down there, maybe other rangers still searching for Claire or Alan. But then I realized the rhythm of the lights was wrong, too synchronized, too deliberate. It was the same tempo as the last transmission. Base. I found him. I backed into the cabin, heart hammering, and slammed the door. The radio on the desk was still blinking, steady as a heartbeat. I pulled the battery again. The light stayed on. That's when I heard the knock. 3 slow taps on the glass. I turned. Through the fogged window, a figure stood barely 10 feet away. Ranger jacket, hat, shoulders straight as if waiting for orders. I couldn't see the face, just the faint gleam of a radio clipped to the chest, glowing red in the mist. I wanted to yell, to ask who they were, but something inside me froze. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. The fog behind them didn't shift naturally. It moved with them, bending and contracting like it was breathing through their body. The figure raised its hand, 2 fingers to the mic, and keyed it. Inside the cabin, my own radio keyed itself at the same time. "Base," the voice said. "Requesting extraction." It was my voice again. Same inflection, same rhythm, but empty. Like a perfect copy stripped of thought. I shoved the desk against the door and stumbled back, nearly tripping over the bunk. My flashlight beam cut across the room, and that's when I saw the corner. There was another radio lying there on the floor, an old model, its casing cracked, wires exposed. It shouldn't have been transmitting, but the speaker was alive with faint static. I could hear whispering, hundreds of layered voices forming one shape of sound that almost resembled words. "Stay." I stared at it, pulse shaking through my body. "What do you want?" I whispered. For a moment, the static stopped. Then a single voice came through, soft, measured, like a breath pressed against glass. "You're one of us now." The room tilted. My vision tunneled until all I could see was the red blink of the radio light. I don't know how long I stayed that way, frozen, listening to the hiss of unseen voices crawling through the air. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. The line between thought and signal started to blur. I could feel each frequency ripple under my skin, like the forest was transmitting straight into me. When I finally blinked, the fog outside had thickened to a solid wall. No light, no shape, no horizon. Just an endless gray pulse beyond the window. I tried to call for help. I really did. But every time I keyed the mic, the same thing happened. My own words would play back through the speaker a second later, twisted slightly like they'd gone somewhere and come back changed. "Base, this is. Base, this is." The echo replaced me halfway through the sentence. Then it started finishing my thoughts. "Base, this is Ranger 12. I dropped the mic. It dangled against my chest, still transmitting, the signal light flickering between red and white. A noise outside made me turn, a dragging sound on the deck like boots through wet snow. Then another knock, slower this time. A scrape of nails against the glass. I forced myself to look. The figure was still there, but closer now. So close the condensation from its breath fogged the inside of the window. And through that fog, I could finally see the outline of its face. It was me. Same uniform, same scars on the knuckles, same sunburned skin. But its eyes were gray, pupilless like the surface of the fog itself, and its mouth didn't move when the radio on my chest whispered again, "Base. I found him." My body reacted before my mind did. I ran. I bolted through the back door and into the snow, boots sliding, flashlight beam jerking through the mist. I didn't stop to look back. I just ran downhill toward the old logging road that led to the valley. The forest blurred past me in shades of white and black until everything became noise. The hum of the signal, the crunch of snow, the pounding of blood in my head. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into a clearing. The fog had thinned just enough to see the outlines of the old Ranger Tower in the distance, one we decommissioned years ago after a lightning strike warped its foundation. I forced my legs to move, climbed the icy steps 2 at a time, and slammed the hatch behind me. The air inside smelled of rust and mildew. My flashlight swept across the walls and caught something that made my stomach twist. Dozens of old radios nailed into the wood, each one cracked open, wires spilling out, every speaker pulsing with a dull red glow. For a moment, I thought they were off. Then they all clicked on at once. The sound was deafening. Hundreds of versions of my own voice overlapping, reciting call logs from years of service, reports I'd made, weather updates, patrol notes, every word I'd ever said on duty. Base, trail clear. Base, found prints near timberline. Base, checking in. Base, visibility's low. And then finally, all of them together. Found him. The walls began to tremble. I covered my ears, screaming for it to stop. The tower groaned, metal bolts popping from the pressure of the sound, and underneath it all, one calm, quiet voice whispered through the chaos. "Transmit." The moment I heard it, I understood. The forest wasn't listening, it was recording. Every ranger who'd ever worked these woods had left a trace, a frequency, an imprint, and something was collecting them. I felt the mic on my chest pulse warm against my skin. I didn't key it. I didn't have to. It turned itself on, and through my own mouth I heard the voice speak. Base, this is Ranger 12, requesting extraction. The world flashed white. When I opened my eyes, I was standing at the base of the tower, the snow falling quietly around me. The radios were gone. The tower was dark, abandoned. The fog had lifted. My first thought was that I'd made it out, that it was finally over. Then I heard my own voice over the radio again, clear, steady, somewhere deep in the forest behind me. Base, this is Ranger 13. Visibility's low. Requesting confirmation. But there is no Ranger 13. I didn't run this time. I should have, but something in me, some stubborn, frozen part of my mind, wouldn't allow it. The voice on the radio sounded too human, too alive, and for one insane second, I thought maybe it was someone else trapped the way I'd been. Maybe it wasn't trying to mimic me this time. Maybe it was asking for help. So I keyed the mic. My voice cracked when I spoke. Ranger 13, this is Base. Confirm your location. Static, then faintly, just past the timberline, following tracks north. My chest seized. That was exactly what I'd said the night I found Alan's radio. Word for word, the forest was repeating itself like a recording loop that didn't know how to stop. Stay where you are, I said, forcing calm into my voice. I'm coming to you. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to break the pattern. Maybe I wanted to know if there was anyone still human out there. I grabbed my flashlight, clipped the radio to my vest, and followed the old road east. The snow was falling thicker now, muting everything except the steady crunch of my boots. The forest had gone still again, too still, like every sound had been swallowed into the static that hung low in the air. Every now and then the radio would crackle with faint whispers, snatches of words that sounded like the names of the rangers who'd disappeared before me. I kept walking until the road narrowed to a trail. The fog pressed close, and the trees leaned inward, their branches bent and blackened from old burns. Then, ahead of me, I saw light, a faint red blink at ground level. My heart started pounding. I raised the radio. Ranger 13, I see your signal. Do you copy? The reply came instantly. Copy Base, found something. What did you find? Silence. Then, slowly, the voice said, You. The flashlight beam wavered in my hand. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the ground. I stepped forward instead, one slow pace at a time until the red light came into focus. It wasn't a beacon. It was a radio, half buried in snow. My own unit with the same serial number scratched into the side. The mic was keyed down, though no one was touching it. And from the speaker, my own voice came through, calm and unbroken. Base, this is Ranger 13. Visibility's low. Requesting confirmation. The air around me started to pulse. Soft at first, then stronger, vibrating through the ground. The fog thickened again, rolling between the trees in twisting strands that looked almost like fingers. Somewhere in that noise, the radio's static began to take shape. It wasn't random anymore. It was rhythmic. Breathing. I stumbled back, tripped over something half buried in the snow, and fell hard. When I reached out to steady myself, my glove brushed fabric, thick, canvas-like. I turned the light down. It was a jacket. Ranger issue. Half frozen into the dirt, with a badge still pinned to the breast. I wiped away the frost, and my stomach turned to ice. Ranger 13. The voice on the radio changed then. Not an echo this time. Something else. A rasping sound like air being forced through broken glass. You shouldn't have answered. The fog ahead of me shifted, and a shadow moved through it. Tall, wrong, moving like it wasn't bound to the same gravity as everything else. I saw the faint outline of a hat, a glint of metal at the chest where a radio should have been, and then the shape leaned forward. Base, it whispered. I found you. My body snapped into motion. I grabbed the radio, turned, and ran until my lungs burned and my legs went numb. Branches whipped against my face. The fog followed, curling low to the ground, staying just out of reach but never falling behind. I don't know how long I ran before I saw the lights of the main base flickering through the snow. I half fell through the front door, gasping, radio still hissing in my hand. The main comm room was empty. The heaters were off. The only light came from the glow of the master console, every single channel indicator blinking red. For the first time, I realized what that meant. All frequencies were transmitting, at once. I walked to the console, shaking, and lifted the master headset. The earpiece was cold, almost wet, but I pressed it against my ear anyway. The voices came through instantly. Dozens of them, layered like overlapping waves, all Rangers, all repeating their last transmissions. Visibility low, following tracks north, campfire still burning, requesting confirmation, found him, and then, beneath all of them, a single low tone, steady and deep, vibrating through the building's foundation. It rose slowly, harmonizing with the voices until it became a hum I could feel in my chest. My vision flickered, the lights dimmed, and every speaker in the room clicked on at once. Through the distortion, a voice spoke, calm, commanding, ancient. You kept calling. We only answered. My throat locked. Who are you? The reply came in 1,000 overlapping versions of my own voice. The forest doesn't forget. The forest remembers everything you say. The sounds swelled until the walls groaned. The equipment racks shook. The radios sparked and hissed, each one glowing red-hot from inside. I backed away, covering my ears, but the voice was already in my head. You listen long enough, it whispered, and you become what you hear. The last thing I remember was the glass shattering, the radios exploding outward in a rain of sparks. Then silence. When I woke, it was morning. The base was dark, the snow outside untouched. My radio was dead. No lights, no hum, no sound. For a moment, I thought maybe I'd imagined it all. Then I saw the console. Something had scratched words into the metal right above the main channel dial. Ranger 14. I laughed until my voice broke. Because there's no Ranger 14 either. But every time I close my eyes now, I hear it calling from somewhere deep in the timberline. My own voice, calm and certain. Base, this is Ranger 14. Visibility's low, requesting confirmation. And every night I feel the static start to hum again. Not from the radio, from inside my skull. I used to believe the forest would always tell the truth. The wind carried honesty in its breath, the creeks murmured stories of time, and the soil beneath my boots held the weight of everything that had ever lived here. I thought the woods were my ally, my constant companion. But I was wrong. The forest doesn't tell the truth. It hides it. It swallows it whole. My name isn't important, and neither is the title on my badge. What matters is that for the last 11 years, I've worked as a ranger in one of the loneliest stretches of forest in the Pacific Northwest. They call it Mill Creek Reserve, though the maps have changed names over the years. Some say it used to be part of an indigenous preserve. Others say the land was condemned decades ago after a string of disappearances. I didn't pay much mind to that when I first came here. Back then, I was young and proud. I knew how to read tracks, follow tree blazes, listen for storms before the clouds rolled in. My days were simple, logging wildlife sightings, fixing trail markers, checking in on campers who ignored the closed for maintenance signs. But even in the daylight, there was something uneasy about this place. The forest had a way of listening back. At night, it was worse. The wind didn't move through the trees here. It stopped in them, like it got stuck. The pine needles made no sound when they fell, and when I'd turn off my headlamp, I could feel the dark watching me. The first year, I convinced myself it was just the silence getting to me. Isolation does that. But after my third season, I realized silence isn't empty here. It's heavy. It's waiting. My outpost sat at the end of a service road that wound 30 miles past the main ranger station. Most rangers hated being stationed that far out, but I volunteered for it. I liked solitude, or at least I thought I did. The cabin was old, built sometime in the 50s, with creaking floors and a small generator that only ran half the night. There was no cell service, no radio contact once the sun went down. Just me, the forest, and the occasional pair of headlights from lost campers who never should have been out that deep. The first strange thing happened in late October, about 7 years ago. It had been a dry month, no wind, no rain. I was finishing my last patrol before dusk when I noticed something strange along the North Ridge. Large tracks, deep enough to break the topsoil. They weren't bear tracks. The stride was longer, more deliberate. Each print was about 16 inches long, and the weight it left behind was unreal. I remember kneeling down, pressing my fingers into the outline, and feeling the vibration of the ground underneath, like a faint hum. I told myself it had to be an elk, maybe an old bull dragging one hoof. But the pattern didn't match. They went uphill, straight through terrain even deer avoided. I followed for about 200 yards before the tracks simply stopped. No fading, no break in the soil, just gone. The forest was silent, even the birds. That night, I logged it in my report but didn't send it in. No one believes track stories. Rangers joke about it. Bigfoot prints, ghost fires, phantom cries. Everyone's got a story they laugh about but secretly believe. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. 3 days later, a local trapper named Earl came into my station. He was a quiet man, one of those old-timers who still carried a revolver and wore the same wool jacket every winter. He told me he'd been setting traps near the North Ridge and wanted to report something odd. When I asked what, he just stared at me for a long time, his eyes flicking to the window. "You hear it yet?" he asked. I said no. He nodded slowly, almost relieved. "You will. Don't follow it when you do." Then he left without another word. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the tracks, about the hum I'd felt through the ground. Around midnight, I heard it, the sound Earl must have meant. It came from deep in the pines, maybe a half-mile out. It wasn't a howl or a growl, not even an animal sound. It was rhythmic, slow, like something knocking on a tree. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle, stepping out into the cold. The forest was pitch black except for the faint blue of the moon cutting through the canopy. The knocks continued, farther now, like they were retreating. I followed for maybe 15 minutes until I reached the old dry creek bed. Then it stopped. I waited, my breath fogging in the cold. And then, I swear to this day, I heard my own name whispered back to me. It wasn't an echo. It was close, just over my shoulder. I turned, light sweeping the trees, but there was nothing. No footprints, no movement, just that feeling, like the forest was holding its breath. When I got back to the cabin, I locked every window and didn't write a word of it in my report. By morning, it almost felt like a dream. The woods looked normal again, sun filtering through the mist, squirrels darting across the path, but I noticed something off near the tree line, a pile of pine cones stacked neatly in a spiral about a foot high. At the center of the spiral was a strip of fabric, olive green, my uniform color. I stared at it for a long time, trying to tell myself it was a prank. Maybe Earl was screwing with me, or one of the other rangers hiked up here to mess around, but there were no boot prints, no tire marks on the service road, just that spiral, perfect and deliberate. Later that afternoon, I went to check the wildlife cams we'd set up along the ridge for a deer migration study. One of them had stopped transmitting 3 nights prior, the same night I'd heard the knocks. I hiked out and found it smashed against a tree, metal twisted, lens cracked clean in half. When I reported it to the main office, they brushed it off as vandalism, maybe a bear, maybe a hiker. But bears don't crush metal cleanly like that. And hikers don't leave the scent I smelled there. It was sour, like wet stone and blood. That night, the generator died early. The cabin went black, and I just sat there listening to the wind scrape against the window panes. Then came the smell again, that same sour, metallic scent seeping through the cracks. My flashlight flickered when I turned it on. I stepped outside, heart pounding. The forest was still. Then I saw them, 3 trees ahead of me, freshly marked with claw-like gashes high up, maybe 10 feet off the ground. Each cut oozed sap, and in the moonlight, it looked almost like something had bled. Something moved behind those trees, something tall. I caught only its outline, a shifting bulk that blended into the dark. It stood there longer than felt possible, not moving, not breathing. And then it turned, slowly, and walked deeper into the forest. It didn't run. It walked, like it wasn't afraid of anything here. That was the first night I truly understood the kind of fear the old rangers used to whisper about, the kind that makes you question your own senses, the kind that turns reason into a trap. And yet, the strangest thing was what I felt right after it disappeared. Not just fear, recognition. Like part of me already knew it was out there, waiting for me to see it again. I didn't tell anyone about what I saw that night. You don't just walk into the ranger station and say you watched something 10 feet tall glide between trees and vanish into thin air. You'd lose your post, or worse, they'd send you in for evaluation. Out here, your mind is your most valuable piece of equipment. Once it cracks, the forest finishes the job for you. But the forest remembers what you try to bury. A week later, I found the first journal. It was hidden behind a false panel in one of the supply cabinets at the cabin. The only reason I even found it was because I dropped my radio battery and it rolled underneath. It was a weathered green notebook, the kind the Rangers used decades ago, bound with string, edges torn, water-stained. On the first page, someone had written a single line in red ink, "Do not follow the knocking." No name, no date. The handwriting was uneven, rushed. I flipped through the pages, and what I found made my hands shake. The entries were from a ranger stationed here long before my time, maybe the 1970s. He mentioned strange sounds, tree knocks, voices, heavy breathing outside the cabin walls. He described finding bones arranged in circles, deer carcasses suspended in trees, and a smell that stuck to the back of his throat for days. The last entry read, "It isn't an animal. It wants to be seen, but only when you're alone." I closed the book and sat there, staring at the wood stove, the hum of the forest pressing against the cabin walls. My rational brain told me it was just paranoia, that solitude can play tricks on the mind. But part of me, the part that had heard my name whispered in the dark, knew it wasn't madness. It was a warning. The following evening, the main office radioed me to check in on a missing camper. A man named Miles Henrik, mid-40s, had gone hiking along the North Ridge Trail 3 days earlier and hadn't returned. His car was still parked near the trailhead. I volunteered to lead the search, maybe because I felt like I needed to face that part of the forest again, to prove to myself that I wasn't losing it. By dawn, I was hiking toward the ridge with 2 volunteers, local hunters who knew the area well. They were both quiet men, the kind who spoke more with looks than words. The forest was heavy with fog, so thick it felt like walking through milk. Every sound seemed close and far at the same time. About 3 miles in, one of the men stopped. "Do you hear that?" he asked. I did. A low thumping echoed through the trees. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. The other hunter muttered something under his breath and turned pale. "That's not woodpeckers," he whispered. We stood there for what felt like minutes, the sound circling us like it was moving between trunks. I called out Miles's name. The forest swallowed it whole. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the knocking stopped. We found the campsite around noon. The tent was collapsed, torn open from one side. A small fire pit sat cold beside it, and the ground around the site looked disturbed, like someone had been dragged through the dirt. There were prints, deep ones, the same kind I'd seen near the ridge weeks before. But this time, there was blood. I remember kneeling beside one of the prints, feeling the chill sink through my gloves. It was fresh. The hunters wanted to leave immediately, and I didn't argue. We marked the site for the main search team and started back toward the trailhead. But the forest didn't let us go easy. The fog thickened, the temperature dropped at least 10 degrees, and then, far off behind us, we heard a scream. It wasn't human, or at least, it didn't sound fully human. It started as a man's voice and ended in something guttural, broken. One of the hunters began praying under his breath. We moved faster. No one spoke. The trees felt closer now, their trunks too dense, too uniform, like the forest was changing shape around us. Every few steps, I felt that same hum through the ground again, the one I'd felt when I touched the prints the first time. When we finally reached the service road, we didn't look back. That night, back at my cabin, I pored over the old journal again. I compared the descriptions, how the sounds would start the same way, how the victims were always called deeper by something they couldn't explain. The ranger who'd written it mentioned a figure that blended into bark, something tall, pale in the face, with eyes that glowed faintly when the moon hit them. The last line he'd written before the ink trailed off said, "It mimics the voice of the last one it takes." I couldn't sleep after that. I sat up, the journal open on the table, listening to every creak and groan the cabin made. Around 3 a.m., I heard something outside, soft, deliberate footsteps in the snow. Not animal steps, human pacing. I reached for my rifle and flashlight, careful not to make noise. Through the window, I could see movement, someone standing just beyond the tree line. Tall, still. Too still. I called out, "Miles?" Silence. Then a voice answered, "Help me." It was his voice. The same tone, the same rhythm from the missing person's file. "Help me," it said again, weaker this time. I should have opened the door. I should have gone out there. But something deep inside me screamed not to. It wasn't instinct. It was recognition. The same way you recognize a nightmare you've had before. The voice grew quieter, then stopped altogether. I waited until dawn before stepping outside. There were tracks in the snow, long strides leading away from the cabin. No sign of struggle, no blood, just those same impossible footprints I'd seen before. I followed them for about 50 yards before they ended at a pine tree. An old one, maybe 200 years old. At its base was a small pile of pine cones, perfectly arranged in a spiral. In the center was something half buried in the snow, a torn piece of a ranger's sleeve, olive green. And stitched on the corner was a name patch. It wasn't Miles's. It was mine. I don't remember walking back to the cabin. My body did it without my mind attached, each step hollow, mechanical, like the forest was moving me instead of the other way around. When I closed the door behind me, I sat on the floor for a long time, staring at the torn sleeve still clutched in my hand. My name patch, ripped clean off my own jacket, but my jacket was still intact, hanging by the wood stove. The forest had given me something that belonged to me, as if it was saying, "I know who you are." For the next few days, I barely slept. I checked every inch of the cabin, every window latch, every hinge. I went through my old reports, the ranger logbooks, even the maintenance requests, anything to make sense of what was happening. That's when I noticed something strange about the incident archives. The digital files for Mill Creek Reserve only went back to 1991. Anything before that was missing. No paper backups, no scanned documents, just a blank. But the outpost had been active since the 1950s. There should have been at least 40 years of records. I called the district office and asked if they had older files. The woman on the other end hesitated before answering. Some of those records were destroyed, she said. Fire. Back in 92. Where? I asked. At the old archive building, she replied. It's gone now. Was it near Mill Creek? Silence. Then, yes. Why? I thanked her and hung up. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The old ranger's journal, the disappearances, the burned archives. It all lined up too cleanly to be coincidence. That night, I took the generator fuel, a headlamp, and a notebook, and hiked toward the site of the old archive building. It was about 6 miles from my cabin, just deeper into the forest than any trail officially allowed. The air grew colder as I went, unnaturally so, until my breath came out in clouds thick as smoke. When I found it, it wasn't much, just a foundation of blackened stone and a few twisted beams poking through the moss. But buried under the debris was a metal box, half rusted, locked tight. I pried it open with my knife and found what I'd been hoping for. 3 old ranger logs, wrapped in plastic. They smelled like smoke and mold when I opened them. Each one was dated between 1968 and 1974. And in each one, the entries were nearly identical to the journal I'd found in the cabin. One ranger wrote about a figure in the fog that watched him from across the creek. Another described hearing something whisper through the vents at night, using the voices of people who'd gone missing. But the entry that shook me most came from 1971. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. It doesn't come from the woods. It comes from below. There's a cave system under Mill Creek that was sealed decades ago. Locals say it's where the old miners vanished. The knocking isn't from trees. It's from the stone. Something's waking up down there. That word, below, stuck in my head. When I got back to the cabin, I pulled out the old survey maps. Sure enough, there were faint, faded markings on the northern ridge labeled Mine Access, Decommissioned. The area was officially closed due to land instability. But I'd been there before, the same ridge where I'd found the footprints. It was almost 1 a.m., but I couldn't wait. I packed a lantern, a rope, and the old journal, and hiked back toward the ridge. The forest was dead quiet. No owls, no wind, not even the distant rush of the creek. Just that thick, suffocating silence. When I reached the site, the ground dipped sharply into a shallow depression. There, hidden beneath layers of moss and pine needles, I found it. A sealed wooden hatch, nailed shut with rusted iron bands. The boards were black with rot, but you could still see the shape of an old mining emblem carved into the top, a pickaxe crossed with a pine tree. The air coming from the cracks was cold and sour, the same metallic scent I'd smelled near the crushed camera. I stood there for a long time, my hand on the wood, listening. Then 3 knocks from underneath. I stumbled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. Knock, knock, knock. And then something else. Breathing, shallow, heavy. Not like a person. It was too deep, too wet. The journal's words echoed in my head, "Do not follow the knocking," but I couldn't stop myself. I found a crowbar in my pack and wedged it under the boards. The wood cracked, 1 nail at a time. The last board split with a sharp snap, and a rush of cold air poured out, thick with the smell of decay and wet earth. I lifted the lantern and looked inside. The tunnel went straight down, a shaft of rock and timber, maybe 10 feet across, the old ladder still half intact. I hesitated, the beam of my light trembling. The air below moved slightly, like something was shifting in the dark. I climbed down anyway. The temperature dropped instantly. My breath fogged up so fast I could barely see. The tunnel opened into a wide chamber, the walls slick with condensation. There were old mining tools scattered everywhere, rusted picks, broken helmets, scraps of fabric. But what struck me most were the markings on the walls. They weren't carvings or graffiti. They looked grown. Patterns of darker stone that spiraled outward like veins, all converging toward the back of the chamber. And in the center of that spiral, embedded into the wall, was something that looked like a handprint. It was too large to be human. I stepped closer. The rock around the print was warm to the touch, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. I backed away, my stomach twisting. Then I saw something else. Footprints. Fresh ones. They led deeper into the cave, into a tunnel that disappeared into blackness. And at the end of that darkness, movement. Something tall. Stooped. Its skin pale like bark, its arms too long. It turned toward me. The light hit its face just enough for me to see the eyes, empty, gray, and reflective like a wolf's. And when it opened its mouth, the sound that came out wasn't a growl. It was my voice. Help me. I dropped the lantern and ran. The thing's footsteps echoed behind me, heavy but measured, as if it wasn't chasing. It was following. The tunnel walls blurred as I scrambled up the ladder, every breath burning in my chest. I slammed the hatch shut and fell backward into the dirt, the lantern's flame still flickering below. From under the hatch came one last set of knocks. 3. Then silence. I stumbled back through the trees, gasping, the forest pressing close on every side. The fog had returned, thicker than before. Every branch looked like an arm reaching out. When I finally reached the cabin, I locked the door, bolted the windows, and sat there until sunrise, my rifle across my lap. And when the light finally broke through the trees, I saw it. A new set of prints circling the cabin. Same shape, same stride, but this time they weren't leading away. They were leading in. By sunrise, the forest had turned gold, gentle even, as if it hadn't spent the night trying to unmake me. The birds sang again, the mist burned off, and for a fleeting moment I thought maybe it was all in my head. Maybe the fear, the cave, the thing with my voice, All of it had been a hallucination born out of exhaustion and isolation. But then I saw the tracks. They surrounded the cabin completely, pressed deep into the damp soil, each print perfectly spaced, circling the building 3 times before vanishing near the tree line. I counted 13 full revolutions. 13 times something had walked around me while I slept. The ground was churned near the front door, like it had stopped and waited. I couldn't bring myself to open that door for hours. When I finally did, the air outside was still. Every pine needle seemed to be watching. I followed the tracks as far as I could until they dissolved into a patch of frost where sunlight hadn't yet reached. No direction, no trail, just absence. Something about the way the silence clung to me made my stomach twist. It wasn't quiet the way it normally was in the woods. It was too measured, too aware. It was as if the forest was holding its breath again, waiting to see what I would do. I thought about hiking out, leaving the cabin behind for good. But the radio on the desk started hissing then, though it wasn't turned on. Just static, faint but rhythmic, like breathing through metal. I reached for it slowly. The dial flickered to life for a second, even though the generator was off. And through the static came a voice. "Unit 4, this is base. Do you copy?" I froze. The transmission was clear, unmistakable, but Unit 4 had been decommissioned years ago. I picked up the receiver anyway. "This is Mill Creek Station," I said. "Who's calling?" For a moment, nothing. Just the hiss. Then, soft laughter. A man's voice, cracked with age. "You shouldn't have opened it," he said. I dropped the radio. The static stopped instantly. The cabin went silent again, except for my pulse pounding in my ears. The voice hadn't sounded like anyone I knew, but it carried something familiar, something I couldn't place. I sat there staring at the radio for minutes that felt like hours, until the sound of the generator outside made me jump. It was running, but I hadn't turned it on. I stepped out slowly, rifle in hand. The hum of the generator echoed off the trees, steady and too loud in the morning stillness. And that's when I saw the smoke. Thin wisps curling up from the direction of the old North Ridge. Something was burning. I grabbed my pack and started toward it, half expecting to find a campfire left behind by hikers. But as I climbed higher, the smell hit me. Not wood smoke. This was harsher, acrid, burning plastic. The closer I got, the quieter the woods became. Even the insects stopped. When I broke through the last stretch of brush, I saw it. A half-melted Ranger vehicle. My vehicle, the one parked outside my cabin. It sat in the middle of a small clearing, smoldering, its hood buckled and glass shattered. My keys were still in the ignition. I stood there in disbelief, staring at the charred frame. The earth around it was scorched in a perfect circle, like the fire had been contained within some invisible boundary. No tracks, no fuel spill, no lightning strike. And then from where behind the wreck came a sound I'll never forget, a slow, dragging exhale. I raised my rifle, backing up toward the trees. The sound came again, closer. Something shifted behind the smoke. At first I thought it was a person. It stood upright, long-limbed, almost human, but its skin was stretched too thin, its shoulders bent wrong, its head tilted too far to one side, and the way it moved, jerky, uneven, like it wasn't built for standing on 2 legs. It stopped at the edge of the clearing. The smoke clung to it like fog around a cold body. I couldn't see its face, only the pale shimmer of its eyes. Then it spoke. "Ranger," it said in a voice that wasn't one voice at all. It was layers of them. Men, women, even children, woven together into something unnatural. "Ranger, don't leave." I fired. The shot echoed through the trees, scattering birds into the air. When the smoke cleared, it was gone. No body, no blood, just the forest trembling with the weight of the sound. I ran back to the cabin. Every step felt wrong, like the ground had softened under me. I could feel that vibration again, the hum, faint but there, pulsing through the soil. Inside, I bolted the door and shoved the old journal into my pack. My hands were shaking too hard to write. I don't know why, but I needed to record what I'd seen, like proof for whoever came after me. Maybe the next ranger. Maybe nobody. When night fell, the forest changed again. The air turned colder than I'd ever felt, the kind that seeps through walls. The knocking started around 9, soft at first from far away. 3 knocks. Pause. 3 more. Then closer. By midnight, the sound was right outside. I sat by the door with my rifle, every muscle in my body locked. The knocks came again, louder now, shaking the window glass. Then silence. A moment later, something slid under the door. I didn't move for a long time. When I finally reached down, my fingers touched paper. It was a page from the old Ranger's journal, the one I'd left open on the desk earlier. But this wasn't the same page. This one wasn't burned or yellowed. The ink was fresh. It said, "It found the way out." My chest tightened. The forest outside moaned with wind, or what I thought was wind, long, hollow wails rolling through the trees like distant sirens. And then I heard the voices, not whispers this time. Words, dozens of them. Names. I heard Miles, I heard Earl, I heard others, names from the missing persons list, and somewhere among them I heard my own. The voices moved around the cabin, circling, rising and falling like a chant. I shouted into the dark, "Hey, what do you want from me?" The voices stopped. Then one of them, one that sounded exactly like me, answered from just beyond the door, "To remember." Something hit the wall then, hard enough to crack the frame. Dust fell from the ceiling. The lights flickered and went out. I aimed the rifle, finger trembling on the trigger, but I knew it wouldn't matter. You can't shoot what isn't fully there. When the silence returned, I stayed still until dawn. I must have blacked out at some point because I woke up slumped against the wall, the sun bleeding through the blinds. Outside, the tracks were gone. The forest looked normal again. Almost. The pine trees nearest the cabin, every single one, had a handprint pressed into its bark. The same massive shape I'd seen in the cave, imprinted into living wood, as if something had reached out and touched them all during the night. And from the way the sap bled down their trunks, it looked like the trees were weeping. There's a silence in the forest that only comes after something has happened. A kind of stillness that's too complete, too intentional. That's what I felt the next morning when I hiked up toward the ridge where we'd heard those howls the night before. The air was cold, metallic. Every step of my boots sank into frostbitten soil, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The trees here, old ponderosa and lodgepole pine, leaned close to each other, their needles whispering in tones I couldn't quite make out. I'd walked that ridge dozens of times before, but it felt different now. The land looked rearranged somehow, like someone had come through in the night and subtly changed the layout. Fallen branches where there shouldn't be any, tracks that led nowhere or circled back on themselves. I crouched near a set of them, hoping to find bear or elk prints, but what I saw didn't fit either. The stride was too long, the heel too deep, and the toes spread wide, almost human, but not quite. They trailed off toward a ravine where mist pooled thick and low like smoke from a dying fire. My radio crackled. "Base to North Ridge, you there?" I lifted it to my mouth. "Yeah, I'm here." "Got a hiker report from the valley side. Says they saw lights last night. Blue ones. Moving uphill. You see anything?" I paused. I hadn't seen lights. Just that voice echoing through the timber. But something about those blue lights, something about how calm dispatch sounded, made me hesitate. "Negative," I finally said. "Probably campers with headlamps." There was a pause. "No camps registered in that zone," they replied. "Keep an eye out." I clipped the radio back on, but I didn't move. The weight of the forest pressed in on me. It was quiet again, too quiet. Even the birds had gone silent. When I finally pushed through the underbrush and reached the edge of the ravine, I found something I still struggle to explain. Down below, half buried under a patch of snow and dead leaves, was a torn ranger jacket. The logo was faded, but I recognized the old emblem, the kind they stopped issuing in the late 80s. The fabric was stiff, frozen, and when I lifted it, something slid out from the pocket, a small, water-warped notebook. It was almost completely illegible from the moisture, but a few words still showed through. Ridge Sound. Don't follow the light. I stood there with the wind cutting through my jacket, feeling like I was standing at the edge of two overlapping worlds, one rational, the other something else, something older. I made my way down into the ravine to see if there was more. The ground grew soft, almost spongy, and my boots began to sink into the mud. There were bones scattered around, small ones, animal maybe, but cracked in a way that didn't seem right. And then I saw it. A shape pressed into the snow near the tree line. A depression like something large had lain there through the night. The outline was humanoid, arms, legs, but far too long. I crouched beside it, the smell of wet pine thick in the air, and that's when I noticed the faint indentation of a handprint in the snow. The fingers were twice the length of mine. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the tree line, and that's when I heard it. The same sound from the night before, only closer. Not a growl, not a voice, something in between. It echoed through the valley, rising and falling like language stripped of words. I turned and began to climb out of the ravine. My pulse hammered in my throat. Every sound in the forest suddenly felt directed at me. The shifting branches, the creak of old trunks, the whisper of snow slipping off pine boughs. I didn't look back, but I felt it behind me. That cold attention. That sense of being seen by something that shouldn't exist. When I reached the ridge, I saw movement below, just a flicker between the trees. Tall, thin, walking upright, but the gait was off, too smooth, too fluid. I blinked, and it was gone. By the time I made it back to the ranger station, my hands were trembling. I logged the morning patrol, left out the details, and sat there staring at the old wood stove while the wind howled outside. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that notebook, those footprints, that impossible handprint in the snow. Around 2 a.m., I heard knocking. 3 slow knocks. Not on the door, but on the window beside my bed. At first, I thought it was a branch. The wind was strong enough to throw debris against the cabin, but these knocks were too even, too deliberate. I lay there, frozen, listening. 3 more. Then silence. I forced myself to move. I turned on the lantern and walked to the window. The snow outside was untouched, not a single footprint. That's when the radio came alive again. "Base to North Ridge," it whispered, but the voice wasn't dispatch. It was soft, slow, familiar. It said my name, and then, "Don't follow the light." I unplugged the radio, but the voice didn't stop. The static carried it, faint and broken, like it was coming from the forest itself. I didn't sleep after that. Just sat in the dark watching the tree line beyond the glass, wondering what kind of thing could speak through dead air. When morning came, I found the tracks again, leading away from the cabin this time. Same long stride, same deep prints. Only this time, they weren't headed toward the ridge. They were circling the cabin. That was the moment I realized the forest wasn't keeping me out of something. It was keeping something in. I followed the prints without even realizing I'd made the decision to. The morning light was weak, filtered through a gray mist that clung to the ground and refused to burn off. I told myself it was just for evidence, just to document, to understand. But somewhere deep inside, I knew that was a lie. The forest had its hold on me now. The silence wasn't just absence, it was a pull. The tracks wound past the old fire road and cut into a section of forest we rarely patrolled. Steep slopes, unstable ground, a place we called the Drop, because it was where the mountain fell away into a valley so deep the sunlight didn't reach the bottom until noon. The snow thinned as I descended, replaced by damp moss and black earth. The air grew colder, thicker, harder to breathe. After a while, the trail disappeared altogether. I stood there among the pines, trying to make sense of it when a smell hit me, wet fur and rot, sharp and metallic like blood and stone. I covered my mouth with my sleeve, scanning the shadows. Then, from behind me, a sound, a low, dragging breath. I spun around, rifle in hand. Nothing, only the mist moving between the trunks. But the breath came again, closer this time, and with it a faint clicking noise, like teeth on bone. My pulse pounded so hard I could feel it in my ears. I stepped backward, careful, quiet, every instinct screaming that I shouldn't be here. That's when I saw it, half hidden behind a curtain of hanging moss. A cave. It wasn't on any of our maps, at least not the public ones. The opening was narrow, almost vertical, framed by slick rock and twisted roots. But something about it felt wrong, like the forest itself bent inward around it, pressing me toward the dark. I told myself I'd just look, just take a photo, mark the coordinates, go back. But as I leaned closer, I heard something faint drifting up from the blackness below, a voice. At first, it sounded like a person calling for help, my name even. But the longer I listened, the less human it became. The cadence was off, like it was mimicking speech without understanding it. I should have turned back then. Every fiber in my body told me to. But curiosity, or maybe guilt, pushed me forward. I switched on my flashlight and crawled inside. The air changed immediately, thick with the smell of earth and something else, something alive. The light cut through the dark in a narrow beam, revealing claw marks along the stone. Deep ones, gouged into the wall as though something massive had clawed its way up. The cave widened after a few yards, opening into a chamber where water dripped steadily from the ceiling. My light caught something glinting in the mud, a metal tag, old and rusted. I knelt down, brushing off the dirt. It was a ranger badge, one of ours. And then, further back in the shadows, I saw it, a torn backpack. I recognized the patch stitched into the strap. It belonged to McAllister, a ranger who'd gone missing 12 years ago. They'd said he must have fallen into a ravine during a storm, washed downstream. We'd never found the body. The sound came again, deeper now, layered, as if more than one voice were trying to speak through the same mouth. The flashlight flickered. My heart raced. I turned, scanning the chamber. There was movement at the edge of the light, something tall, hunched, pale. It moved with a fluid, unnatural grace, stepping from the dark like it had been waiting. Its skin was the color of old bark, stretched thin over visible bones. The eyes caught my light and glowed. Not red, not yellow, but a deep, wet blue, like moonlight on water. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The creature tilted its head, watching me. And then, in a voice that wasn't its own, it spoke. "Don't follow the light." My knees gave out. The flashlight dropped, beam spinning wildly across the cave. The creature stepped closer, and with every movement, the air grew heavier, thicker, charged with something ancient. I could hear whispers now, not from it, but from the walls themselves. Names, words, fragments of every ranger who'd ever gone missing out here. I scrambled backward, hands slipping in the mud, and somehow I made it to the entrance. The light of day was faint but real, and I lunged toward it, dragging myself out into the mist. The forest felt alive, shifting, breathing around me. I didn't stop running until I reached the fire road again. When I finally turned back, there was nothing behind me. No cave, no tracks, just fog, like it had never been there at all. I made it to the station hours later, shaking, drenched in sweat. I told dispatch I'd gotten turned around in the fog. They didn't press. They never do. Rangers go quiet about these things. We learned to. That night, though, as I sat at my desk, I opened McAllister's old file. The report was thin, but near the end, someone had scribbled a note in the margin. It read, "Some caves aren't for shelter. They're for keeping something in." I stared at it for a long time, feeling the cold settle into my bones, because I'd seen what was inside that cave. And I knew, whatever it wasn't gone. The forest changed after that night. I don't mean in a way you could see on a map or explain in a report. It changed in its rhythm. The air felt heavier, like it was holding its breath, and the light took on a gray tint even on clear days. The animals stopped moving through the area. No deer, no coyote tracks, not even the chatter of jays. It was as if everything with instinct had quietly agreed to leave, and I was too slow to understand why. I didn't tell anyone about the cave. I couldn't. Every time I thought about it, I felt that same pressure behind my eyes, the same cold weight I'd felt down there in the dark. It wasn't just fear. It was like the forest itself didn't want me to speak. For a few days, I tried to convince myself I'd imagined it, that the exhaustion, the stress, had gotten to me. I cleaned my rifle, did my patrols, checked the trail cams, but the evidence wouldn't let me rest. One morning I found a camera torn from its mount, clawed apart and left in the snow. The metal casing was bent like foil. The memory card was gone. Then the sound started again. Not distant this time, but near. Knocking at the edge of the tree line. 3 knocks, pause, 3 more. Always the same rhythm. At first, I thought it might be someone playing games, maybe kids from the nearby town trying to scare the ranger. But every time I got close, the sound moved deeper, drawing me in like bait. And then there were the lights. I saw the first one while checking the fire tower trail just after dusk, a faint blue shimmer, floating low among the trees about 50 yards ahead. It moved slowly, weaving between the trunks, pulsing like it was breathing. I raised my flashlight toward it, but the beam just dissolved into the mist. The light flickered, then split into 2. For a second, I thought I saw a figure standing between them. A shape, long-limbed, like hunched, but when I blinked, it was gone. By the time I got back to the station, there were 2 trucks parked out front, ones I didn't recognize. 3 rangers stood inside, their uniforms new but unmarked, no name tags, no regional insignia. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head, asked if I'd seen anything unusual on patrol. His tone was casual, but his eyes weren't. He looked at me like he already knew. I told him no. He nodded slowly, like he didn't believe me. "If you hear anything strange," he said, "radio it in immediately. Don't go investigating on your own." Then he paused and added, almost as an afterthought, "And if you see the lights again, look away." They left before sunset. No explanation, no call to headquarters, just gone. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I closed the blinds, checked the locks, but every time I walked past a window, I swore I could see movement out there, just at the edge of the light. Around midnight, the power went out. Total darkness. My lantern wouldn't turn on. My radio was dead. The silence pressed so thick I could hear my own heartbeat. And then, faintly, I heard it again. Knock, knock, knock. I grabbed my flashlight, but it barely flickered. I stood there, holding my breath, listening. The sound came from the back door this time. I took 1 step closer and heard it again, slower now. Knock, knock, knock. I swung the door open. Nothing, just fog rolling in over the snow. But then the fog shifted, and for a split second, I saw something standing just beyond it. Tall, still, facing me. Those same faint blue lights shimmered in the mist where its eyes should have been. I slammed the door shut and backed away. My flashlight dropped from my hand and rolled across the floor, its weak beam landing on something near the window. Boot prints. They started at the window and ended just behind where I was standing. My knees nearly gave out. I turned, but there was no one there. Only that smell again, wet fur, rot, and cold metal. The rest of the night was a blur. I sat on the floor with my back to the wall, rifle in hand, waiting for dawn. The knocking stopped around 3 a.m., but the silence afterward was worse. It was the kind of silence that feels alive, like the forest itself is listening. When morning finally came, I opened the door to a fresh set of tracks leading away from the cabin. Not human this time. The prints were deep, clawed, and spaced wide apart, each one pressed perfectly into the snow. They led into the trees and vanished near the ridge. That was when I realized the cave wasn't just a place. It was a boundary. Something had crossed it when I did. I packed up that morning, gear, maps, field notes, and drove down to headquarters. The air felt thinner with every mile, like I was finally surfacing from underwater. But when I arrived, the station was locked, the windows boarded. A note taped to the door read, "North Ridge District closed until further notice." No explanation, no dates. I drove to another ranger post 40 miles away and told them I was from North Ridge. The older ranger behind the desk looked up sharply. "That area's been closed for years," he said. "You must be mistaken." I just stared at him. "I worked there this week." He shook his head slowly, his face pale. "Son, there hasn't been anyone stationed there since the fire in 2009. My stomach dropped. I tried to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. Whatever I thought I knew, whatever I thought was real, was slipping through my fingers. That night, I stayed in a motel off the highway. I kept the TV on for noise, but the static between channels sounded too much like the voice on my radio. Around 1 a.m., I went to wash my face and saw something on the mirror. Condensation from the shower spelled out 3 words: "Don't follow light." I drove back to the forest the next morning, even though every rational part of me screamed not to. I don't know what I was hoping to find. Proof, closure, maybe just confirmation that I wasn't losing my mind, but I couldn't leave it unfinished. The thought of those rangers, the ones with no name tags, the cave that vanished, the message in the mirror, it gnawed at me like a slow infection. The closer I got, the more the world seemed to thin. The trees looked wrong, the same way they had that morning after the first howls, slightly rearranged, subtly warped, as if the forest had tried to rebuild itself from memory and got a few details wrong. When I reached the station, it was exactly as I'd left it. The only difference was the smell. Damp, stale air mixed with ash. Inside, my notes were gone. The radio was on again, faint static hissing from the speaker. I picked it up. "Northridge to base," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Is anyone there?" Silence. Then faintly, a voice. "Don't follow the light." I dropped the radio and stepped back. The air around me felt charged, like the second before lightning strikes. I turned to the window, and through the frost I saw movement. Not one shape this time, but several. Standing at the tree line, tall and thin, their outlines wavering like heat on asphalt. The blue lights pulsed in pairs where their eyes should have been. I grabbed my pack, rifle, and flashlight and stepped outside. I don't know what drove me, fear, defiance, maybe something deeper, but I couldn't just stand there waiting for whatever this was to come closer. The moment I hit the tree line, the air temperature dropped by 10 degrees. My breath came out in sharp clouds. The figures moved slowly, retreating deeper into the woods as if leading me somewhere. And I followed. They didn't walk. They drifted. Always just ahead, never quite letting me catch up. The deeper I went, the quieter the forest became, until all I could hear was the crunch of snow beneath my boots and the low hum of the wind weaving through the trees. After about an hour, the terrain started to change. The trees grew thinner, the ground rockier. Then I saw it, just beyond a fallen pine. The cave. It was back. The same twisted roots forming its entrance, the same faint odor of decay drifting from its depths, but this time, the air around it shimmered faintly blue, like the light was leaking from within. I should have turned around. Every instinct screamed at me to, but I stepped forward anyway. Inside, the light wasn't natural. It pulsed from veins along the walls, like the rock itself was alive. The sound of dripping water echoed from deeper in the tunnel. As I moved forward, the air thickened, heavy with the scent of iron and damp earth. And then I saw the carvings. Hundreds of them. Scratched into the stone, some deep and jagged, others faint and trembling. Names, dates, messages, each one written by a hand desperate to be remembered. Some I recognized, rangers who'd vanished years ago. McAllister, Halpern, Ruiz. Others were too old to read. At the far end of the chamber, a pool of black water shimmered under the blue glow, and above it, pinned into the rock, hung what looked like a tattered ranger jacket. Same insignia, same patch, but inside the fabric, something moved. Slowly, breathing. I stepped closer, the beam of my flashlight trembling. The shape within the jacket wasn't human anymore. The torso was stretched, ribs warped, skin mottled and translucent. The face, if it ever was one, was frozen mid-scream. I stumbled back, gagging, and that's when the voices began again. Whispers at first overlapping, building into a low chorus that filled the cave. They weren't angry, they were pleading. Dozens of them. Maybe hundreds. Don't follow the light. It watches. It waits. Don't let it wear your name. The blue glow brightened, pulsing with each word. I raised the flashlight toward the water and saw my reflection move before I did. It smiled. Then it stepped forward, rising out of the pool, shape forming in the same slow, deliberate motion as mist solidifying. My height, my face, but wrong. Skin pale as bone, eyes glowing faint blue. Its mouth opened, and in my own voice it said, "You came back." I turned and ran. The tunnel seemed to stretch endlessly, the air thick with the sound of something chasing me, wet footsteps slapping stone, growing faster, closer. My lungs burned, my vision blurred, and then I saw daylight ahead. I burst out of the cave, fell hard into the snow, and didn't stop running until the trees opened to the fire road. When I finally turned back, the cave was gone again. Only the fog remained, curling low across the ground. That was 3 years ago. I left the service not long after. I told myself I'd never go back, that I'd forget what I'd seen, but the forest never really let go. Some nights I still dream of that blue light pulsing behind the trees, waiting. I'll wake up sweating, heart pounding, and swear I can hear the sound of slow, deliberate knocking somewhere in the distance. I moved to a small town far from the park, took a desk job, tried to build something normal again. But every few months, a letter arrives in my mailbox. No return address, just 3 words written in block letters across the envelope: Northridge closed. Last night, though, it was different. When I opened the envelope, there wasn't a letter inside, just a small photo. Grainy, black and white. The fire tower at Northridge, standing alone against the fog, and in the bottom corner of the frame, barely visible, a figure watching from the trees. Tall, thin, eyes glowing faint blue. I turned the photo over. On the back, in shaky handwriting, it said, "You left the light on." And now, even here, hundreds of miles from that forest, I can see it sometimes through the window at night. Just beyond the edge of the yard, pulsing softly through the dark. A reminder, or maybe a warning. Because the truth the Rangers tried to forget wasn't that something was living in those woods. It's that once you see it, once it sees you, it follows you out.